Right now, there is a microscopic organism living peacefully inside your body.
Just sitting there, completely undetectable.
Yeah, not causing you a single ounce of harm. But under the right conditions, this harmless, quiet neighbor can actually shapeshift.
Oh, it's a phenomenal biological story. We are looking at a literal masterclass in opportunistic survival.
Right. I mean, it can build a literal plastic fortress inside your veins, ride your bloodstream, and travel directly into the back of your eyeballs. Welcome to the deep dive. We've got an incredible exploration lined up for you today.
It really is wild. The journey this organism takes is it's staggering.
And to unpack exactly how this organism operates, we've pulled together a massive stack of source material for you. We're looking at everything from an urgent care medical blog by MD Clinics out in Anaheim to the highly detailed 2016 clinical practice guideline update from the Infectious Diseases Society of America.
The IDSA, right?
Exactly. We're also pulling from the BSHH guidelines on vulvovaginal candidiasis, a systematic review from the NCBI looking at fluconazole prophylaxis, and a comprehensive pediatric study on invasive fungal infections in premature infants.
That stack covers literally the entire spectrum of human medicine. I mean, we're moving from a neighborhood walk-in clinic all the way to the highest, most desperate levels of the intensive care unit.
Which is really the mission for this deep dive. We are going to decode the shape-shifting nature of Candida.
Yeah.
We want to understand how a fungus, best known for causing a very common, highly treatable nuisance, can actually transform into a lethal invader. When we say shape-shifting, we mean that literally.
Absolutely, literally. In its peaceful state, Candida exists as this round, single-celled yeast.
Right.
But when it decides to go on the offensive, it morphs. It grows these long, branching, spear-like filaments called hyphae.
Wow.
Yeah, and it uses those to physically thrust through human tissue walls. That mechanical transformation from a round spore into a penetrating spear is the core of its danger.
It's basically weaponizing itself. But to appreciate how terrifying that hyphal form is, we really have to start where most people first encounter the fungus, right?
Right. In its simple yeast form, causing a localized mucosal infection.
Exactly. Let's start on the surface. Looking at the MD Clinics blog and the BHHH guidelines, they lay out the classic presentation of vulvovaginal candidiasis, or VVC.
A very common issue.
Yeah. If you or someone you know has ever had a yeast infection, you know the symptoms. We're talking severe itching, burning, inflammation, and that hallmark, thick, white, cottage cheese-like discharge.
These infections are incredibly common, and it is worth noting that 90% of these cases are uncomplicated.
Okay.
And they are caused by one specific dominant species, which is Candida albicans.
Yeah, because it's so common, modern medicine has developed highly standard, really effective treatments. Usually it just takes a single 150 milligram oral dose of fluconazole.
Yeah, that's the standard go-to.
Or you might use a 500 milligram intravaginal clotrimazole pessary, which is just, a solid medicated tablet that you insert vaginally where it dissolves and delivers the drug directly to the tissue.
Right.
And even for the unlucky folks who suffer from recurrent cases, which the guidelines define as 4 or more infections a year, doctors will just prescribe a 6-month weekly maintenance dose of 150 milligrams of fluconazole.
Those treatments work beautifully for the vast majority of people, mostly because of the underlying chemistry. Drugs like fluconazole are specifically engineered to interfere with how the fungus builds its cell membrane.
How so?
Well, they target a compound called ergosterol. It's essentially the fungal equivalent of human cholesterol.
Oh, interesting.
Right, so without ergosterol, the fungal membrane becomes unstable. It springs microscopic leaks, and the cell ultimately dies.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you spend 5 minutes on the internet looking up ways to treat these infections at home, you will find a literal mountain of DIY remedies.
Oh, definitely. The internet is full of them.
Yeah, and the urgent care blog even highlights this. You've got people recommending yogurt, inserting raw garlic cloves, or taking baking soda baths. But, trying to cure an active fungal infection with a garlic clove is like, it's like bringing a squirt gun to a grease fire.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, like it might feel like you're doing something proactive, but you are completely ignoring the actual chemistry required to put the fire out.
It is a really dangerous game to play with an active infection. I mean, a cool baking soda bath might offer some temporary soothing of the inflamed skin, sure.
And feels better for a minute.
Exactly. But it is doing absolutely nothing to stop the Candida from multiplying. Medical antifungals guarantee the exact concentrated dosage required to overwhelm the organism's defenses.
Because you can't possibly guess the concentration of the active compound in, like, a random clove of garlic from your local grocery store.
You can't. And this becomes a literal life or death scenario for anyone with a compromised immune system.
Yeah, if your body's natural defenses are down, say you have poorly managed diabetes or an autoimmune condition, that surface infection isn't going to just sit quietly while you experiment with a yogurt remedy.
It's going to take advantage of the weakness.
Exactly. It has the biological potential to spread deeper. You need a targeted, reliable chemical intervention immediately to shut down its ability to replicate.
Because if those local defenses fail, or if a patient's immune system is wiped out, we get to see what happens when Candida isn't contained.
Right.
It stops being a surface annoyance. It finds a way inside, and we enter a systemic crisis.
We enter the bloodstream. Clinically, this is known as candidemia.
And looking at the IDSA guidelines, the severity of candidemia is staggering. This isn't just a rare anomaly, right?
Not at all.
It is one of the most common healthcare-associated bloodstream infections in United States hospitals. It carries an attributable mortality rate of up to 47%.
It's devastating.
Almost half of the patients who get this in their blood do not survive it. And that mortality rate spikes significantly higher if the systemic inflammation pushes the patient into septic shock.
To understand how an everyday yeast makes it into the human bloodstream, you really have to look closely at the environment of a modern hospital.
Okay.
If you take a non-neutropenic patient, meaning a patient who still has a normal, healthy count of circulating white blood cells, the primary culprit introducing the fungus into the blood is often a central venous catheter, or CVC.
Oh, right. Those are the deep IV lines inserted in the major veins of the chest or neck,
Yeah.
used to deliver medications over a long period.
Right. And Candida is biologically brilliant at finding these artificial plastic surfaces.
It just latches on.
Yeah. When the fungus encounters the plastic of the catheter, it undergoes a chemical change. It clings to the surface and begins secreting a thick, slimy, extracellular matrix. It essentially builds a microscopic fortress around itself called a biofilm. This slime layer acts as a physical shield, completely blocking the patient's white blood cells from reaching the fungus.
So it's perfectly safe inside this slime.
Exactly. And from the safety of that fortress, the Candida just continuously sheds thousands of new fungal cells directly into the flowing bloodstream.
Man. So at this stage, the treatment protocol shifts entirely. You aren't just handing the patient a single fluconazole pill anymore.
No, absolutely not.
The IDSA guidelines mandate moving to a heavy-hitting class of intravenous drugs called echinocandins, medications like caspofungin or micafungin.
Because the mechanism of action has to be much more aggressive at this point. We talked about fluconazole causing leaks in the membrane, right?
Yeah.
Well, echinocandins don't just cause leaks. They inhibit the enzyme responsible for building the actual structural wall of the fungus.
Oh, wow.
They are fungicidal in the blood. They cause the fungal cells to literally burst open and die. They don't just stall the growth, they actively clear the bloodstream.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because looking at these IDSA guidelines, I'm seeing a massive clinical contradiction.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, the guidelines spend pages debating what to do with the catheter itself. If the catheter is the literal plastic bridge the fungus is using to invade the blood, and the biofilm is impenetrable, why on earth is there a debate about leaving it in? Rip the bridge down. Pull the line out immediately, right?
What's fascinating here is that the calculus changes entirely depending on the status of the patient's immune system.
Really?
Yeah. For the non-neutropenic patient you just mentioned, the one with a normal immune system, the guidelines agree with you. They strongly recommend pulling that catheter out immediately because it is the undeniable source of the seeding.
Okay, that makes sense.
But consider a neutropenic patient. This is someone whose white blood cells have been completely wiped out, often by heavy chemotherapy for something like leukemia.
So their internal defense system is basically sitting at zero.
Yes. For those neutropenic patients, the source of the fungus usually isn't the plastic catheter. To understand why, you have to look at how chemotherapy works.
Okay.
Chemo is designed to attack rapidly dividing cells in the body, which is what cancer cells are. But the cells lining your entire gastrointestinal tract also divide very rapidly.
Oh, so they become collateral damage.
Exactly. The chemo causes severe microscopic tearing and ulceration all along the gut lining.
So the Candida that normally lives peacefully in the gut suddenly finds that the barrier is severely damaged.
It senses the weakness, transitions into those spear-like hyphae we talked about, and pierces directly through the damaged gut lining, spilling straight into the surrounding bloodstream.
Wow.
So if you aggressively rip the catheter out of a neutropenic patient, you haven't actually stopped the source of the infection. The gut is still leaking fungus into their veins.
You've just made things worse.
Yeah, all you have done is robbed the medical team of vital IV access in a critically ill patient who desperately needs life-saving medications pumped into their body. It is a massive, agonizing clinical dilemma for the attending physicians.
That is genuinely terrifying. Whether it sheds from a plastic catheter biofilm or leaks through a chemo-damaged gut, once Candida is in the blood, it doesn't just float around aimlessly. It has a terrifyingly specific itinerary.
It really does. It behaves almost like a heat-seeking missile for specific types of human tissue.
Yeah, following the IDSA guidelines, we see these unseen battlegrounds inside the body. Candida actively seeks out highly vascularized areas, organs with a very dense network of blood vessels.
Right.
When the fungus lodges in these dense networks, it leads to severe complications like endocarditis, which is a catastrophic infection of the heart valves. It also leads to endophthalmitis, which is an infection taking root deep inside the inner eye.
The fungus thrives in those areas because the dense blood supply provides an endless stream of the oxygen and nutrients it needs to multiply.
It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet for the fungus.
Basically, yeah. But anatomically, those specific areas are notoriously difficult for the immune system to access and clear.
Which leads to one of the most surprising mandates in the entire IDSA document. They state, as a strict rule, that all non-neutropenic patients diagnosed with candidemia must undergo a dilated ophthalmological exam by an eye specialist.
Yes, mandatory.
And this has to happen within the first week of the blood test coming back positive.
An ophthalmologist must physically look into the back of the patient's eyes.
Which is crazy to me. If I have a diagnosed blood infection and a doctor tells me they need to shine a light into the back of my eyeball, that sounds wild. It's like checking the attic for water damage because you know the basement is flooded. Why are we looking up there?
It sounds completely counterintuitive until you understand the anatomical connection. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the choroid of the eye, which is the layer resting just behind the retina, is basically a densely packed web of tiny, delicate blood vessels.
Okay.
It is one of the most highly vascularized tissues in the entire human body.
Oh, so if the fungus is traveling through the blood looking for a dense vascular network, the eye is the ultimate destination.
Exactly. Looking at the retina gives the attending doctors a literal, non-invasive window into the microvascular system of the entire body.
They don't have to do surgery to see it.
Right. They don't have to cut you open to see what the fungus is doing. They can just dilate the pupil, shine a light, and look. If they look at the retina and see these fluffy white fungal lesions growing on the tissue, it tells them something absolutely crucial.
What's that?
It proves the fungus isn't just floating freely in the blood anymore. It is successfully anchoring and seeding into deep tissues. If it has successfully invaded the eye, it is a systemic disaster. It means it is highly likely it is also seeding into the kidneys, the spleen, and the liver.
Man. And treating the eye sounds like an absolute pharmacological nightmare. The guidelines point out that those incredibly powerful IV drugs we just talked about, the echinocandins that burst the fungal walls, they don't penetrate the vitreous fluid well.
No, they don't.
And the vitreous fluid is that clear, jelly-like substance filling the center of the eyeball.
Because it is a totally closed system. The eye has a blood-ocular barrier, very similar to the blood-brain barrier.
Okay.
It's an evolutionary defense mechanism known as immune privilege. If your eye mounted a massive inflammatory immune response to every passing microbe, the swelling would routinely crush your optic nerve and cause you to go blind.
Wow, I never thought about that.
Yeah, so the eye restricts what can pass from the blood into its inner chamber. Unfortunately, that means those large echinocandin drug molecules just bounce right off the barrier.
So how do you get the medicine to the fungus if the blood won't carry it there? The guidelines detail that it sometimes requires a doctor directly injecting antifungal drugs like amphotericin B or Fluconazole into the eyeball
Directly into the eye.
with a needle, or, if the infection is advanced, performing a vitrectomy, which involves surgically entering the eye and physically vacuuming out the infected vitreous jelly.
It is a highly extreme invasive measure. But consider what is at stake here. If those fluffy white lesions are allowed to grow and spread over the macula, the patient suffers irreversible blindness.
Yeah.
You have no choice but to completely bypass the blood-ocular barrier and deliver the drug right on top of the fungal mass.
It's staggering to think about how aggressive the interventions have to get. If this fungus can so easily outmaneuver the fully developed immune system of an adult ICU patient and force doctors to inject drugs into their eyes, it forces us to ask a terrifying question.
Yeah.
What happens when Candida encounters a patient who hasn't even developed an immune system yet?
We have to look at the pediatric and neonatal data for that.
Right. The PMC study in our source stack focuses heavily on extremely low birth weight infants, or ELBWs. These are premature babies weighing under 1,000 grams.
They're so small.
If you are listening to this, visualize a standard bag of sugar in your kitchen. These infants weigh less than that bag.
They are unimaginably fragile. Their skin hasn't fully keratinized, acting more like a permeable membrane than a protective barrier.
Yeah.
Their immune systems are entirely naive, and just keeping them alive requires a multitude of invasive central lines and breathing tubes, all of which provide plastic surfaces for biofilm.
And the statistics from the study are they're devastating. Up to 73% of these ELBW infants who contract neonatal candidiasis suffer death or severe lifelong neurodevelopmental impairment.
73%.
The reason that specific number is so astronomically high comes down to one singular anatomical vulnerability in premature babies: their blood-brain barrier.
Because in a healthy adult, the blood-brain barrier is this incredibly tight, highly selective microscopic filter that keeps dangerous pathogens circulating in the blood from ever touching the delicate brain tissue.
Right.
But the study explains that in these premature infants, that barrier isn't finished building yet. It's highly permeable, it's leaky.
Which leaves them entirely exposed to a condition called hematogenous Candida meningoencephalitis, or HCME.
The fungal cells shed into the blood, ride the circulatory system up to the head, slip right through the gaps in that immature blood-brain barrier, and begin aggressively attacking the brain tissue and the protective meninges.
So what does this all mean for treatment? Because the IDSA recommendation for treating this condition is what really stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah, it's intense.
They explicitly recommend treating these neonates with amphotericin B deoxycholate at a dose of 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight per day. This is the preferred drug because it penetrates the central nervous system well.
That's right.
But wait, I've heard critical care doctors casually refer to amphotericin B as amphoterrible because of its notorious toxicity profile.
They do, yeah.
It is a massive, clunky molecule that is known to severely damage adult kidneys, often causing permanent renal failure. Are we really supposed to give a highly toxic, kidney-damaging drug to a premature baby that fits in the palm of your hand?
It sounds like medical malpractice on its face, doesn't it? But
No.
biology provides us with a bizarre, almost miraculous paradox here.
What do you mean?
Clinical data shows that neonates actually tolerate the renal toxicity of amphotericin B far better than fully grown adults do.
Really? How?
Because their kidneys are still in an immature developing state, their cells somehow don't sustain the same permanent structural damage from the drug that a mature adult kidney would.
Wow. That is an incredible stroke of luck.
Oh, it gets even more fascinating. The real irony, the mechanism that actually saves their life, is the very thing that put them in mortal danger to begin with.
The leaky barrier.
Yes, the leaky blood-brain barrier allowed the fungus to easily slip into the brain. But that same leaky barrier is exactly what allows this massive, clunky molecule of amphotericin B to cross over from the bloodstream into the cerebrospinal fluid.
So the drug can slip through the exact same cracks the fungus used.
Exactly. In a fully developed adult, amphotericin B has a terrible time getting past a healthy blood-brain barrier to treat fungal meningitis. It's just too big of a molecule.
It just bounces off.
Right. But in a preemie, it washes right in. The infant's greatest physiological vulnerability literally becomes the physical avenue for the cure. It allows the drug to bathe the infected brain tissue and eradicate the fungus before it permanently destroys the developing neural pathways.
It is a wild evolutionary loophole that doctors are exploiting to save lives. But listening to all of this, the biofilms building on central lines, the eyeball injections to bypass immune privilege, the devastating meningitis in preemies, if the consequences of invasive candidiasis are this catastrophic, the logical next step for medicine is to stop the fungus before it ever gets a foothold, right?
Prophylaxis, administering the drug preventatively.
We have a systematic review from the NCBI that looked extensively at administering fluconazole prophylaxis. This means taking high-risk patients like those in the ICU or the neonatal ward and giving them a low, continuous dose of fluconazole before they even show a single sign of sickness.
And on the surface, the initial clinical data looks like a massive victory.
Yeah, the good news is undeniable. Prophylaxis successfully reduces the overall incidence of invasive fungal infections in these wards. Fewer patients get Candidemia.
Right.
But the bad news is that it triggers a massive evolutionary consequence. It actively breeds resistance. The NCBI review found that blanketing a hospital ward with preventative fluconazole significantly increases the risk of patients being colonized by fluconazole-resistant non-albicans strains of the fungus.
This is the real danger.
We are talking about much harder to kill species like Candida glabrata or Candida krusei.
By attempting to protect the patient, you are fundamentally altering the microscopic ecosystem of both the patient's gut and the hospital environment itself.
It feels like a classic evolutionary arms race. We build a 10-foot wall with fluconazole to keep the standard Candida albicans out, and the fungus just responds by evolving an 11-foot ladder.
That's exactly what's happening.
By wiping out the weak, easily treatable strains, we are just clearing the battlefield and leaving a wide-open playing field for the heavy hitters like glabrata to take over completely. Are we just engineering untreatable superfungi by trying to be overly cautious?
This raises an important question, arguably the single biggest crisis in modern medicine: antimicrobial stewardship.
Right.
If doctors hand out prophylactic fluconazole to every patient who walks through the ICU doors, they will inevitably, through sheer natural selection, select for the mutated strains that are completely immune to fluconazole.
We are essentially training the fungus to beat our best drugs.
Precisely. Knowledge and technology are most valuable when applied with intense restraint. Overusing our limited supply of antifungals globally strips humanity of its absolute best weapons against these pathogens.
Which makes sense.
This evolutionary pressure is exactly why the IDSA guidelines are incredibly strict about who is allowed to receive prophylaxis. You do not just hand it out to feel safe.
There are rules.
The guidelines dictate it must only be used in highly specific, data-proven scenarios. For example, a neonatal nursery is only permitted to use prophylaxis if their historical rate of invasive candidiasis is greater than 10%. An adult ICU must have a documented rate over 5%.
Wow, so you literally have to hit a statistical threshold of institutional danger before you are allowed to unsheath the preventative weapon.
Targeted, rigorously data-driven prophylaxis is the only way to balance the evolutionary scales. A physician has to protect the highly vulnerable, immunocompromised individual lying in the bed in front of them today without accidentally engineering an unstoppable, drug-resistant superfungus that will ravage the broader hospital ecosystem a year from now.
Man.
It is a razor-thin tightrope that doctors walk every single day.
What a terrifying tightrope it is. When we started this deep dive, we were looking at an itchy, annoying surface infection that you could easily treat with a dissolving tablet at a walking clinic in Anaheim.
Seems so simple then.
Yeah, but as we've seen, the journey of Candida is a masterclass in adaptation. We've traced how a simple yeast can morph its shape, build impenetrable plastic fortresses on IV catheters, and exploit the collateral damage of chemotherapy.
It finds a way.
It infiltrates heart valves and retinal blood vessels, requiring literal needles to the eyeball. It forces neonatologists to exploit the leaky brain barriers of premature babies just to save their lives, all while forcing the entire medical field to balance on an evolutionary tightrope of drug resistance.
It is a phenomenal, highly adaptable organism, perfectly designed to find and exploit human physiological weakness.
It really is. And, I want to leave you with one final fascinating nugget that we found buried deep in the IDSA guidelines.
Oh, this is a good one.
The guidelines state a strict rule. If a doctor takes a swab of a patient's airway or isolates Candida from their respiratory tract secretions deep in the lungs, it is almost always just peaceful colonization. The guidelines explicitly mandate that doctors should not treat respiratory Candida with antifungals.
It is just hanging out in the respiratory mucosa, perfectly content, causing absolutely zero harm to the host.
Which leaves you with a profound biological question to mull over long after you finish listening today. If an organism with this much deadly potential, a fungus that can shapeshift, blind you, stop your heart, and invade your brain, can also live peacefully inside the warm, wet environment of our lungs without causing a single issue, what is the undiscovered microscopic switch that suddenly flips this peaceful neighbor into a lethal invader.
There is always so much more happening beneath the surface of the things we think we already understand.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring those hidden worlds, and we'll catch you next time.